Welcome to Life as a Seed and to this series on narratives, the stories that shape our lives. Okay, I'm Johan. In this series, we're exploring the powerful concept of narratives and how it shapes our lives. And we're trying to unpack this to help you to navigate life, to understand it better, and to help those that you love on how narratives impact us and, positively and negatively, and how we can use narratives and use our knowledge of narratives to navigate life more successfully. So in the first part, we introduced the concept of narratives. And if you haven't seen that video, please go to the first, video where we, unpack the introduction. So in this, which is the second video, I'm going to expand on the concept of narratives. So just as a brief introduction again, just to pick up, a narrative is a low resolution map of reality. It provides us with an outline or sort of an idea or a concept, but it omits details on purpose. It makes life easier to navigate in the sense that we have sort of pathways, we have milestones, we have high points, low points. It helps us to understand our life. It helps us to navigate, to put down goals, and to move forward. It also helps us to make sense of our world and how to navigate our expectations with regards to what we want in life. So I'm going to start by just having a brief outline of why we seek narratives. And the key thing about seeking narratives is to gain understanding. It's to gain understanding for our own lives and for the events that has happened in the past, present, and the events that we would hope for in the future. Now, individuals need a narrative for self-orientation. It's sort of like a mind map for life, the past, the present, and the future. And we all generate these mind maps. We all navigate according to these mind maps. And most of us are not conscious about it. The idea of narratives then plays into this mind map on how we sort of superimpose our own ideas, our own mind map onto a narrative, a larger map. And through that, we then, navigate. The purpose, again, is to omit details and to just look at the resolution that we need to be able to navigate life successfully. It's an instinctive thing. It's what we do without thinking, without spending time, without really knowing about this. So we use this specifically to, number one, understand our past. So we have a narrative in our own lives. We have a mind map of our own life with regards to the past. And our own past is mapped over a larger understanding of the past. And this becomes our narrative for our bigger understanding of our nation, our history, our culture, our family, our community, and then ourselves. The same happens in the present. In the present, we have a certain, set of opportunities, obstacles, challenges that we have to face. And again, we have some sort of picture within our own mind of how those things are constructed, whether they are for us or against us, and how we are actually going to challenge, tackle them. The same for the future. We are trying to map out the future. So in the present, we're trying to understand our own landscape. We are trying to understand our own positioning within the landscape and how to act with the purpose of mapping out a future for our lives that is going to be positive. Again, it is a picture of ideas, of concepts, of outcomes that we are particularly looking for. So in this, we all seek narrative for past, for present, and for future. And we navigate our lives according to those narratives, those symbols, those pictures, those stories, that actually gives us a sense of positioning, a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, a sense of understanding. So we really gain understanding of events of our lives when we are able to manage or formulate a coherent story or narrative that explains what we believe, that explains our current situation, our past, but also our future. And this is the key thing. If we understand, have a sense of understanding how it came about, we feel empowered. If we don't understand something, it's almost like it's a void, and we feel disorientated, we feel lost, we feel that we don't know, and we can't move forward, so we get stuck. So understanding is an incredibly important concept that we are trying to seek, and the purpose of narratives is to provide that understanding. A narrative is therefore an explanatory framework that reflects on our core understanding, our hopes, and our beliefs. It's this core narrative that is, in a sense, symbolic in nature. At the root, it's that in ourselves we are trying to aspire or assign certain core symbols or parables or values to them, whether it be good or evil. So things like disease, war, death, fortune, prosperity, opportunity, all those sort of things become symbolic. They become milestones. They become things that we almost hold in like a sacred realm, and we create pictures of them. We create stories around them. We create narratives that explain how it came about, how we dealt with it, and how we moved to where we are today. So with that as a backdrop, I'm going to unpack the different components of narrative in this video. We're going to look at the larger picture and then zoom right down into the individual positioning within narrative and into meaning and how we navigate our lives through that. So in order to make this more practical, I'm going to take an example of my own life, which happened about 30 years ago when I was 18, 19. And I'm going to unpack the change that happened on a national level within South Africa, where I'm from, and then how that impacted on me personally. I'm not going to get too personal into the details, but it's suffice to say that it is a very real example of how narrative shaped a nation, shaped myself from a broad understanding of how life is supposed to be or worked, right down to a personal level of how the character, the person, had to change and adopt according to the narrative that was prevailing or given or believed or accepted, and how that then changed the fortune, the direction of my own personal life and that of South Africa itself. I'm not here to unpack any political issues around that or any meaning around whatever that means on a political or a social spectrum. I'm purely trying to highlight my own personal experience with regards to narrative and how it shaped my life as it shaped the nation. So to start, the components of narrative is quite important to unpack the different elements, because if you understand the different resolutions of narrative and storyline, you can begin to see how certain events or certain inputs on different levels would impact your own vision, your own understanding, your own picture, and therefore your own narrative. It would be shaped by them. As in the first video, I basically highlighted that we all have a certain perspective on reality, and we pick the perspective that is useful to us. It's therefore not that we want to discard other perspectives, but for our own purposes of navigating life, we only need the immediate perspective that is helpful to us. And therefore we slice and dice reality according to what we need. Now, in here, as I unpack the components, you will again see that they are multi-layered, and that when we look at it from a multi-layered perspective, we can begin to see how narrative shapes us and it shapes our lives. And depending on what narrative we accept or believe, we become subject to that to some degree. So the first high level one is the story world. So that's, perhaps sounds a bit like a strange concept, but it's basically the story of the world in which you lived, past, present, and future. It's the known world. It's not the whole world. It's just your known world, but it's a large backdrop of how things came about to where you are. Then secondly is the master plot schema, where there are different master plots that can be identified in the background of a story. That master plot might be war or death or disease or depression or fortune. It's a big picture of what basically happened in the background. Then there's the personal story, which is your personal story and how you fit it into the big story world, into the master plots. Then we move on to character positioning. Now, character positioning is more your own positioning within the story. You almost become like a character in the story. So if your family have a story, you are a certain character in that family and in that story. And we all know sometimes it's the darling, it's the favorite, or it's the black sheep, or it's the rejected one, or it's the firstborn, or whichever. But there are characters. So that's just a simple example of a character within a family story. But then we become characters within society. We become characters within the bigger national picture. So then from the character, there are plot lines. Now, plot lines are basically the connections between past, present, and future. And we try to orientate ourselves, our own character, through the story and through the plot lines. We try to connect the past to the present, in trying to explain how we got from the past to the present and what made sense, what were the things we learned, what was the things we failed in, did we grow, did we become negative or positive, etc., etc. The plot lines. The same for the future. We all want a positive future, but the future is unknown. There can be fear, there can be anxiety, there can be the unknowns of your own outcomes and your own challenges with regards to health or work or relationships, etc. So those are the plot lines. And then from that picture, the bigger picture down to the personal one, we use that to gain meaning. We then extract meaning from that. So if there was a past to a present, we try to make up a coherent story that gives us understanding. And then out of that understanding, we extract meaning. And the meaning empowers us to orientate ourselves, to have a certain view of the past, a view of the present, and a view of the future. It enables us to make certain decisions. that are then logically, put together in our own minds so that we can have a coherent process in which we move forward. If we can't find meaning, we can't gain understanding, we can't find meaning, then it means that the narrative is broken or it's breaking down. And then it becomes more and more difficult to actually function in this world because you have too many questions. You have too many areas that are unresolved, that you're spinning your wheels because you can't move forward, because you don't understand what it means. You don't find meaning in it. You don't find any resolution. So either if it's pain or grief, then you know that it's pain or grief. But it's the question if you don't know, you don't fully understand. And it's in this space of where people are seeking for meaning that the biggest risk arise in life, and the opportunities come for people to go either left or right, up or down, make big leaps forward, or actually become stuck in a depressed place because of the amount of meaning that they can extract out of their own stories and storyline. And then out of that meaning comes the empowering that navigates our life. So let's jump into the detail, and I'm going to use my own story as an example to unpack this a bit more. So to start again with the story world, it basically represents the historical context within which you find yourself. The important issue is that it is your story world. It's your historical context. There are many, many, many other historical contexts that you are not, that is not known to you. It's not relevant to you. So you don't need to know it. The more you know, the broader the scope becomes. So if you have a very limited story world, then your own scope, your own view will remain quite limited. But it is the broad, big strokes of a selected historical view of the past that explains basically your current position, your current positioning and circumstances, how you came to where you are from the past. So the example that I want to take from my own life, from a big picture story world perspective, is a period from 1989 to 1994. So, 1988 and 89, I was 18, 19 years old, and I was in the army, in the South African army, where we fought, the Bush War in Angola. And then within 5 years, we had the birth of the new South Africa, the Rainbow Nation. So in that context, my world completely changed. Within 5 years, the backdrop, the sort of how I came about and what it meant and what my own positioning would be, what my own purpose was, what my role would be, that whole backdrop changed completely. Everything that I was sort of raised to think or believe in how the world came about was sort of destroyed. And there was a new backdrop. The new backdrop was the new South Africa versus the old South Africa. It was the one of apartheid versus the new democratic South Africa, of non-racialism. So it was a massive change in the story world. So basically, my own story, my own positioning within those 2 years, 88 and 89, was that of a soldier that was at war, where South Africa fought in Angola against the Cubans and the Russians. And the purpose was to defend white nationalism to defend apartheid. It was the army was a tool for racial black oppression during apartheid. And within 5 years, the Soviet Union collapsed. The South African Bush War ends. Namibia became independent. South Africa moved to a democratic dispensation. Nelson Mandela was released from prison. The ANC was unbanned. The ANC came to power. Democracy is born in South Africa, and we had peace and reconciliation. Now you can imagine as a teenager, as a young adult, that had a massive impact on how I would orientate my life, how I would make sense of this world. What did it mean? What did it mean of the past? What did the past all of a sudden mean now that I had to navigate a completely different landscape? I was not raised for this landscape. It was not my landscape. It was a new landscape. And somehow I had to find a new narrative. So this is basically an example of the story world as a big backdrop. So from the story world, we move on to the master plot schemas. Now, all cultures have different master plot schemas for narratives. The master plots they're all similar in kind. They differ in the specifics, but in kind, they are all basically the same. They all have stories of war, stories of death, stories of earthquakes and disease and famine, and of fortune and prosperity, and of hardship and death, and it's of evil of evil oppressors, and of invading armies, and how we defend our own, etc., etc. These stories, master plots, the schema of these things are identical in all cultures. From a high revolution, from a low level, resolution. When you go down to the details, obviously the history is different. The armies are different. The way it plays out is different. But it's important to understand that these plots are not new. How they are connected and how they play out is not new. It is simply, if you read enough history, then you see that these master plots are like schemas. They repeat themselves. They keep coming forward. There's always the evil side. There's always the good side, depending on your perspective, depending on which group you belong to. The other group is always opposing, attacking, evil. Our group is always good, noble, pure. These are the sort of master plot schemas. So these are rooted and they emerge from the culture and the history within a people. They are encapsulated through simple stories, and we all seek them in a sense. And we seek different ones because we need to balance them out. We can't just have a story of fortune, because just having a story of fortune and prosperity, doesn't sound too good. We also want a story of hardship and perseverance and overcoming, because that speaks to our resilience. It speaks to our strength. It speaks to our character. So it's almost as if we know instinctively that we need all of these different components to make a complete story. It's as if the character of a nation needs these. And it's important to understand that a nation or a group of people know this instinctively, and they sort of put this together, and they all seek them, but they're all quite similar. So it's not this uniqueness of my group or my nation or how I am now, all of a sudden, this specific one. So a master plot schema provides broad-based group identity to families and to individuals. So this is the broad strokes of how my group, how my culture, how my nation is overcoming one, is one that is the one that I should belong to, is the one I should be proud of, has unique characteristics. It also has the same that other groups that are not the same, that are different. They are all sort of, put in a bit of a, different perspective. And this is the same for all cultures, for all groups, for all families. We have to defend our own. We have to put our own story together. We have to navigate our own lives. So this we do instinctively. So master plots frame the aspirations of nations and people groups. It tells us where we as a nation or a group should be. It's trying to explain how we got to where we are and where we should be going. So back to my own story, my own master plot within the 5-year period that I'm talking about, from 1989 to 1994, and I'm trying to contrast how it changed, was the master plot was in 89 was a war to defend my white nation. That was the backdrop. I was a soldier. I was, conscripted into the army. I didn't have a choice. I simply had to go. And this is what the story was. I had to fight for my white nation. All of a sudden, within 5 years, I had a new function, a new duty. There was something different was expected of me. And the duty was now to build the Rainbow Nation. Now, can you see how this would have created a bit of a problem for me? Because all of a sudden, I'm in two different worlds. It's as if I go from one world to the other, and I need to find out who I am in this place. And it was not as if I was in each one of them as sunk in and this is all I had. No, I was an individual that could think, that could operate, that could individually make decisions. But the backdrop of my world was definitely these two different worlds. And yet I had to find myself within that. So this is, if you can begin to see, this is a bit where my thinking came from, of trying to understand how narratives would then shape my life. In 1988 and 89, when I was 18 and 19, it most definitely shaped my life. It made me something. And then in the transition years, it made me something else. But did I really change? Was that really a born-again experience, an experience of being a different person? No. It was a change of the story world. It was a change of the master plot. It was the rewriting of history. It was the reconstruction of narrative streams. And people within South Africa were basically told that this is where you need to slot in. So this is the story of South Africa. I'm personalizing it from my own perspective to sort of highlight certain things. So now we move to my story. So we have the story world, and we have the master plots, and then it comes down to my individual story. Now, how does my individual story come about? Well, initially, children are initially incorporated into the culture through a personal family narrative. When we come to consciousness as children, we don't have a story. The story we get is the story we told. We adopt a story. And because we are born into a family, that's just what happens? You adopt your family story. This is how you're introduced into a culture. And the purpose of raising a child is to make the child socially compatible. And being socially compatible means that I can fit in. I can actually become part of a group. I can actually, associate with people properly. And I can build proper relationships. And all of that actually happens through the story. And when we then find people that have a similar story, we click. It's like we connect. They part of us. We have the same story, so we're in the same group. When we then meet someone else who has a completely different story, it's as if we already know, okay, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know. I can't really navigate with you. I can't go along because I don't know. This is not my story. So in a sense, we get ushered into a culture. We get ushered into our own personal story world through narrative. And we evaluate our own narrative and our own story in context with how we meet other people, and then try to fit those things in. So as you grow up, you have to develop your own identity. So obviously you begin to write your own narrative. And as young people, teenagers, they all think they are writing these radical, narratives that's going to break the mold. But when you look back, then you realize, no, I didn't really break anything. I was just within a lane, and I just went from one to the next, but I was actually still within the narrative. The narrative still holds sway in my life. So it's important to understand that a personal narrative is always encapsulated within a larger narrative of the nation or the ethnic group. And those sort of boundaries is normally culture, religion, language. It's where the difference in the story becomes too great that people form groups, and your narrative, in a sense, determine whether you're accepted, whether you can associate, whether you can become part of, whether you can participate, and whether you can be trusted to contribute. And it's important that everyone is expected to have a story. We like to ask people, so tell me your story. We listen to try and get the cues of people's stories so that we can gauge, where are they? Are they on the same map with us? Are they seeing the same thing as we do? Do they see the world in the same way? And we say, well, they have similar values, they have similar views, they hold similar beliefs or convictions. Really, we do that by listening to their stories. And by listening to their stories, we think, yes, your story is close to mine, so therefore we are part of the same group. We are traveling in the same direction. We have the same past, the same present, or similar past, similar present. And therefore, the expectation for the future is also similar. And by listening to people's story, we make decisions of how we relate to them. So narrative is critical in relationships and how we knit our lives together with other people. So back to my own expected story. So it's not my personal story, but it's the story that was expected from me. And I'm now, diverting a bit in the sense of using the story world and the master plots to sort of highlight how there was an expected storyline from me and how my story should have been scripted according to the prevailing narrative in the nation at that point in time. So again, to highlight, in 1989, I was a soldier. I had to believe in the cause. So what was the cause? The cause was to defend apartheid. It It was to fight against communism. It was to defend white nationalism. Then 5 years later, I had to believe in the cause. But now the cause was very different. I had to build the Rainbow Nation. I had to, promote reconciliation. I had to reject racism and defend diversity. I had to reject white nationalism and supremacy. So, again, there was a whole load of expectations from the one side, which was being a soldier at war, fighting somebody, to go back, become someone else, and now you have to be a reconciler. And again, to highlight, how do you construct a story? How do you just bridge these gaps? How do you become so split that all of a sudden you can just transform? And the issue is, in a big way, narratives drove this, and the narratives shaped people's lives. So, yes, did it shape the people in South Africa? Absolutely. Did it change their storyline? Absolutely. But what changed it? It was the overriding narrative that changed it. It was the overriding ideas of narrative, the storylines, the plot lines. People begin to see different futures, begin to see different plot lines, different outcomes, different expectations. And people will expect it to move together. So the key thing here is to come back to the original statement. Narratives, the stories that shape our lives, and how the story in South Africa shaped a whole nation and shaped different people. Now, I come from an Afrikaner or white background, and the shaping in my own life is, very different from the shaping of a closer brother of mine who would have a different perspective. He would come from a different picture. He would have been part of the apartheid struggle, and he would have been probably part of the liberation movement, and he would have been on the other side of the war. And then all of a sudden in 1994, we were called brothers and put together. So the power of narratives must not be underestimated. It has a real impact, and it does shape our lives. So to move on, even on a more personal level, is within a story, I have to become a character. It's my own personal perspective of duty, of role, of responsibility, of actions, of things that I do. And it's as if I need to see myself. What sort of actor will I be in the story? Am I a good actor? Am I a bad actor? Am I a trustworthy actor? Am I a sneaky actor? Am I just one to ride along? Am I going to be a world changer? Am I going to be someone that's just going to sort of try and latch on and see where it takes me? Or am I going to take ideas and concepts and try and change my world? It's all part of the kind of character that we see ourselves to be. We play this out within a storyline. So when we begin to act, make decisions, decide whether we go left or right, we many times evaluate those things according to the character that we aspire to be. And that character, again, is embedded within a story. And the stories shape us. It shapes what we think it should be. So the character identification is part of my sense-making process. I'm trying to make sense in order to understand, in order to know, in order to have a picture of the future, to navigate the future. But part of that, I need to know who I am, what role I have to play, and what roles and responsibilities I have within that. So then we move on to plot lines. So plot lines are the connections between different events. These are sort of an event in the past to the present to the future, and we try to connect these plots, these points, in order to sort of make the leap in understanding. Once we can make the leap mentally from the present to the future, for example, we are then sort of released or activated or empowered to move forward. If we can't see these connections, if we can't make the connections, it's very hard for us to move forward. So we become stuck. We remain in one place. So the linking of different events is very, very important. But it's also important to understand that we really struggle to make these steps forward, these connections, this forward movement, if we can't see. And by seeing, I mean understanding my current situation, understanding my future, understanding my expectations, and having the emotional energy to move forward. And plot lines are important in this sort of level, to connect my own actions to future expectations. Then we move on to meaning. So meaning is very important because through the story world, the master plots, my own character, positioning, my own development of my character, I derive meaning out of that. I derive meaning of the history, the meaning of the present, and also the meaning of the future expectations. It's out of that meaning that I'm driven. I become empowered through what it adds to my life. Without meaning, an individual feels lost, feels disorientated in this world, and therefore it's critical that we take it down. Now here the character, the power of narrative again comes in. The purpose of narrative instinctively is to provide meaning. It's to explain to us on a very low resolution level, what does this mean? What does it mean to us as a nation, as a group, as a family, as a community, as an individual? What does it mean? And out of the meaning we find in it, we are released, empowered, commissioned to move forward. If the meaning is lacking, we struggle to find the forward-looking perspective. We struggle to find a footing and a direction to actually move forward. So narrative is one of the most powerful sources of meaning and sense-making available to us. Finally, from meaning, we come to the navigation of life. So coupling the master plot, the personal story, the character association, the plot lines and the meaning together, it gives me the ability to navigate my life. It provides me an understanding of the past, present, and gives me a positioning within the larger story. Then also gives me a sense of community and belonging. Narrative then provides me with a path of sometimes clear objectives within a storyline, or it empowers me with momentum to take me forward because I aspire to other things. So such forward orientation serves as a kind of map. So it's when you connect all of those things plus the meaning and the power that it gives you and the direction that it gives you, it leaves you in a sense with a low resolution map. And that is what a narrative is. Not just a story of the past, but it's also the story of your future. It's the story of your present. It's the story that you want to see unfold in your life. And so narratives we should be viewing as a map that we use to navigate. It's not reality. It is a perspective. As I said in the first video, it's very important that we understand that it is my perspective and it's real to me, but it is only one perspective in many perspectives. And it is important to understand that when we develop a multi-layered perspective, we get much closer to reality as it is, life as it is, and not life as we see it or life as we want to see it. So thank you for tuning in. So this was the second part in a series on narratives, the stories that shape our lives. Please stay tuned and subscribe to be notified of the next videos as they come out. Thanks for watching.